talks about life. Interview Ben, take 2.
So then you did Hard Sun,
Yep.
which was definitely more on the dramatic end of the scale, but there was still a lot of comedic elements to your role. Like you were still kind of like the awkward.
Yeah, and I think if I'm remembering right, and Canyon will maybe jump in and yell and change my answer, but I remember specifically after a day or two of shooting, Canyon came to me and said, you're most interesting when you're yelling or being funny, and I'm like, so the rest is terrible, right? And he's like, no, that's not what I'm saying. And he's like, what I mean is, and what we got to the essence of things is that instead of me trying to play this kind of like stoic Ryan Gosling type or something, let's bring myself, how I am as a person, more to the role and bring some lightness to some of the scenes, because it didn't need to be, even though the character did have abuse in his life and did have some darkness in his past, at this point in his life he's tried to move past that, and he's at a point where he wants to move forward. He wants to get out and see more of the world. So there was a lot of discussion about that, about letting it be lighter, letting it be not so gloom and doom, because the movie itself does have some heavy moments. So if it's all heavy, then people are just like, what am I watching this for? And I think it worked a lot. And my wife actually said that after she saw it, she was like, I think that's the most you I've ever seen on screen, the most real version of me, because I wasn't putting on like any kind of other, artifice or anything like that.
Yeah.
And there's some really heavy stuff in there. I don't want to ruin the ending for anybody who hasn't seen it, but there's some sad things that happen and some dark places I had to go to, and it was cool working with Canyon because he and I have been friends for a while, and it was the first really dramatic. I think it's the first time I ever had to cry on screen, and I'm very, like I said before, I built up these walls, so that's a very vulnerable, private place for me to go to in front of a crew, and it's easy to think that, all right, I'm ready, and then as soon as action happens, you're like, yeah, it's like it just goes, and it was happening on that day. I was just shutting down because I was afraid to show that, and I remember I pulled Canyon aside. I was like, can we cut for a second? I pulled Canyon aside, and I was like, this is what the scene means to me, and I described what it meant to me and what I was drawing from, and I gave him like a little clue into what it meant, and it was about this, like, kind of about my grandma and losing her, and how I didn't want this other character to go through those emotions, and I was starting to get blocked emotionally because I had prepared myself for a very long time for this one very short scene, but I knew, and it wasn't, to me, just so I'm clear, getting emotional on screen isn't about jacking yourself up to get this emotion to be like, I'm crying, aren't I a good actor? That's not what it's about. What it's about is doing service to the story and doing service to the character in where they are in that moment and how they're dealing with it. And so for me, it's never about, like, I wasn't like just trying to cry because I thought this would be the moment that people go, well, he can cry. That's not what it's about. It's about that he has had loss in his life, and he knows that the woman he's in love with is experiencing an extreme loss in this moment, and he is helpless to save her. And it's that helplessness that brings him to the point of breaking down. It's not about just having an emotion for an emotion's sake. It's about the helplessness, and I was equating it to my own life and my helplessness when my grandma was sick, and I pulled Canyon aside because I was getting blocked. I couldn't. It just was like, it wasn't happening. I just felt really locked off, and he could tell because he knows me really well. And I told him what it was about and how I felt the scene was, and we talked about it. And I gave him this image of what I was working off of, the room where I last saw my grandma. And we started again, and I was getting blocked again. And then he just said, keep rolling. And then he just softly said, remember the room, remember the room. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks, and it fed the scene. And it's one of my favorite moments in the movie because I know it's authentic. I know it's not forced. And I think it serves the scene. It's not, and it was cool because I'd never done anything like that before, and so it was fun to work with somebody that I knew, that I was friends with, that I felt comfortable with, that I knew also his bullshit reader. I don't know if I can swear on this, but whatever.
he would tell me if I was sucking, basically. We're friends, so he would be like, this isn't very good. It wouldn't be like a director I don't know who's just like, I'm trying to make the day. We went long on a lot of days because we were adamant about getting the scenes right. And so, yeah, it was dark. It was crazy stuff, and I haven't really had to do much as dropped in as that, but it did give me more confidence moving forward when I do have dramatic things that I've done since.
And then you had the scene where you confront Mark, who is also played by Canyon, where, well, I'll let you talk about it, but it started out scripted and then kind of...
It got largely improvised, yeah. Because we found that when we were just doing the lines, it just felt like two actors yelling at each other. It didn't feel like two friends that had known each other for a while but had this underlying tension finally exploding and saying how they really feel and calling each other out. And so I'll never forget, though, the first take we did, it's a PG-13 movie, and I said the F word probably 13 times. He was like, cut, great, that was awesome. Everything was great about that take, except we have to do it again and don't swear as much. And I'm like, yeah, because I have a tendency in my real life when I get emotional to kind of not have a filter, and that's how I get kind of sweary. So I needed to separate myself from that. But then, yeah, we did it a second take, and some real stuff came out, and it was fun to, because you always think of improv like, oh, an improv scene, it must be hilarious, you know? It's like Judd Apatow, we're just making a riff here, but you can also improvise within a dramatic moment and serve that more when you know the characters and you know the relationship well, and I think that helped in that moment.
Yeah.